Good morning, I'm Adam Sines here today with a special broadcast about the crisis going on in the Ivory Coast. The Ivory Coast gained its independence from France on August 7, 1960. Under the rule of its first president, Houphouët-Boigny, Ivory Coast was able to find political and economic stability by maintaining close ties to the West. Houphouët-Boigny was succeeded by Konan Beatty in 1993, but Beatty was overthrown on December 24, 1999 by General Robert Gui, the first coup d'etat in the history of the Ivory Coast. An economic downturn followed. Gui allowed for democratic elections in 2000, which were won by Laurent Gbagbo, but Gui refused to step down. Street protesters forced him to step down, and Laurent Gbagbo became the president of the Ivory Coast on October 26, 2000. In 2002, there was a rebellion in the north, and governmental forces killed more than 200 protesters from March 25th to March 27th. This marked the beginning of the First Ivorian Civil War, which did not end until 2007, when Gbagbo and opposition forces agreed to cease hostilities until 2010 elections.
I'm Vincent McCory.
And I'm Demiake Mokaliele. This is In Focus.
And we begin in West Africa. Vote counting is underway in Ivory Coast. Following Sunday's runoff for presidential elections, 2 people were killed during the election as both candidates complained of voting irregularities.
A government statement says a group aligned with northern rebels opened fire on soldiers and civilians, killing 1 member of the armed forces and 1 civilian. It says 3 people were injured in the attack, including 1 who's in critical condition. In the village of Kanonsla, officials say the house of a supporter of President Laurent Gbagbo was burned. There were also reports of voter intimidation against people from the Jola ethnic group. First round of voting, Aimé Mambo says everyone is hoping for a peaceful outcome.
We are going to keep calm and serene waiting for the results. No matter who will win, he's going to be the president of Ivory Coast, and we should all accept him.
Ouattara supporters here in Abobo say they will not abide by the overnight curfew imposed by President Gbagbo because they say it opens the door for electoral fraud. President Gbagbo says the measure is necessary to ensure security. Scott Stearns, VOA News, Abidjan.
Trop de tueries. On m'a fait coucher et on a allumé le feu.
Quand il a attaqué mon mari, puis il a fui et c'est parti. C'est par la brousse qu'on m'a attaqué à une machette. Il a tué mon enfant aussi.
Là, moi, on m'a attrapé. Il dit, il veut me tuer. Je me suis donné pardon. Il insiste. Il dit, je vais te tuer. Il veut me macheter.
Ils sont arrivés dans notre maison, ils ont cassé la porte, ils ont tiré dans la maison. Une petite fille de 5 ans qui a pris des plombs dans le cou, elle est morte sur le champ. Ils m'ont mis dehors, on dit de m'asseoir. Donc il a pris son canon 12, il a braqué sur ma nuque, il n'y avait plus de balles. Il a pris la machette, il a attaqué sur ma tête là. Pour lui, j'étais mort.
La plupart des villages ont été détruits là-bas ou brûlés et les populations ne sont toujours pas revenues. La plus grosse difficulté pour nous, c'est de voir qu'on a toujours des blessés qui arrivent et des gens qui ont été blessés il y a 2 semaines, 3 semaines, ça dépend, qui sont restés cachés en fait en forêt. Pour nous, c'est un indicateur que les gens ont peur de venir jusqu'à nous, ont peur de réaccéder aux villes. On a exactement la même information de l'autre côté de la frontière au Libéria.
As you can see on the map, the Ivory Coast is comprised of 4 primary ethnic groups. Both the Mande and Voltaic are located in the northern half of the Ivory Coast. Meanwhile, the Akan and Kro are located in the south. Gbagbo draws the majority of his support from the Christian and industrial southern groups, while Ouattara is supported by the northern ethnic groups, who are predominantly Muslim. In addition, the northern ethnic groups are mostly immigrants from Burkina Faso and Mali, and it is very underdeveloped. In 2010 marked the beginning of the Second Ivorian Crisis. Democratic elections were held with Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara as the candidates. During Gbagbo's campaigns for presidency, he frequently brought up the concept of an Ivoirite. This idea states that true Ivorians are only those who are Kru and Akan, which are the southern regions of the Ivory Coast. Northerners like Ouattara are not true Ivorians. Gbagbo believes that anyone who is not an Ivorite should not live in the Ivory Coast. The ICC received jurisdiction over matters dealing with the Ivory Coast only after Laurent Gbagbo agreed to be subject to the provisions of the Rome Statute in 2002. Even though Gbagbo clearly committed genocide under Article 6 of the Rome Statute, he is currently only being charged with petty offenses. This failure to charge Gbagbo and many high officials like him has occurred multiple times throughout history. For instance, at the Nuremberg trials, many high-ranking Nazi officials were not charged with genocide because, according to them, it is hard to determine how they might have directly caused the killing of ethnic minorities. The International Red Cross was quick to send in aid to help the Ivory Coast, and on multiple instances provided reports detailing the brutality and of the fighting between pro-Gbagbo and pro-Atora forces. After the city of Ducal was captured by pro-Atora forces, the International Red Cross reported that 800 civilians had been brutally murdered, and over tens of thousands had fled the city. The Red Cross's reports helped spur an international response that brought an end to the crisis. The international community, including the United Nations, African Union, European Union, US, and France, have all supported Atora's presidential appointment. The UN and the UN Security Council, who started a UN mandate after the first Ivorian crisis, also extended that mandate to June the 30th, 2011 in order to deal with the second Ivorian crisis. However, negotiations between the UN and Gbagbo failed to resolve the conflict. The international community's response was satisfactory since they eventually apprehended Gbagbo on April 11, 2011, and prevented further killings that way. The French were instrumental in the final assault on Gbagbo's compound, and Gbagbo, once captured, was placed under UN guard. The political, social, and economic divide between the northern Ivory Coast and the southern Ivory Coast is so profound, there are very few permanent solutions to this crisis. A division of the country into two separately ruling countries is a potential solution to this crisis, to prevent future violence and death. This could be done in the same way that North Sudan and South Sudan were created after Sudan broke up. Other states could also help facilitate future democratic elections in the Ivory Coast, which would also help prevent future conflicts. International organizations like the IMF and the World Bank could help support impoverished northern Ivory Coast, which would help reduce economic strains on the country. NGOs like the International Red Cross can continue to help the Ivory Coast by providing aid in both food and shelter. Here at CBS Westphalia, recommend that the International Criminal Court prosecute both Laurent Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara under genocide. According to Article 6 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in 1948, genocide is defined as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a nation, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Since both Gbagbo and Ouattara killed Ivorians only on ethnic lines, both should be prosecuted for genocide. In addition, NGOs like Apopo need to be brought into the Ivory Coast in order to remove IEDs that were used during both crises. Also, the international community needs to figure out what to do with the 375,000 refugees that are located both within the Ivory Coast and in neighboring nations like Liberia. Unless both are prosecuted, Ivory Coast will no doubt remain unstable. We also here at CBS Westphalia recommend that free elections be held in the Ivory Coast, but this time under the watch of UN peacekeepers and by other democratic nations. Thank you and have a good night.